Good morning and good afternoon, whatever time you might be listening to this. I'm Tina Games with the Voter Information Committee. Welcome. This is our annual Financial State of Harwich program, and I'm delighted today to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with my left here. This is Terry Russell, Monomoy School Committee. Then we have Jack Brown, Chair of the Finance Committee, Carol Coppola, Finance Director for Harwich, and Chris Clark, Town Administrator, Harwich, of course. And then we have Scott Carpenter, Superintendent, Monomoy Regional School District. And then Bob Sanborn, Superintendent, Cape Cod Regional Technical High School. And then Michael MacAskill, Chair of the Board of Selectmen for Harwich. My colleague, Pam Groswald, who will be moderating this panel discussion today. So Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tina, and thanks to all of you for joining me this morning. We are going to try to keep this to an hour so that we don't lose our audience out there. And what I'd like to do this morning is have you hit the high points of your budgets for this year, explaining how they fit into the town budget as a whole. So I'm going to start with Chris Clark, our town administrator. Chris, you start the ball rolling way back in the fall and present what you think would be a good, sensible, and workable budget for the town. So if you could just briefly describe how you got to where you are, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I think that's a great way to start, too, that when I look at the budget starting off, I want to make sure that we build off of, can we sustain what we had last year, and how do we build for the future? And I think that that is a good way to look at the approach. You know, I always think that the first and most important thing to do in these circumstances is where are we? And right now, the budget that has been voted by the Selectmen and by the Finance Committee is balanced. There's no need for an override, and we're building reserves by about $1.4 million.
That's probably the best message I've heard in a long time. So.
For FY19,
right.
I think we've had a real solid year. And I know you sent a few questions, so I'm going to hit some of those themes. We certainly have had major challenges, and how do we address those challenges? Mm-hmm. And you know, the way I look at it is we have had challenges. Monomoy, when I first started, was coming online, and the challenge of merging that. I think this year's budget, you start to see that debt starting to decrease. So we've hit the high point of that debt, and now it's working its way down, which is important and important for us. You have the tech school, which is 4 years behind and catching up to where they are in their process, and that will be coming online. For the town side, because I'm going to let these guys deal with their specific topics, but for the town side, the harbors have been an important piece. We've had 30 years of I don't want to say neglect, but 30 years where we haven't done enough to keep up with it. Mm-hmm. And in my time here, we've tried to address each of the 3 harbors. And I just want to do a shout out for, I think John Rendon has been an excellent member of this management team, because he was challenged with, don't just tell me how much money it's going to cost, find solutions to help me pay for it. And he has received over $2 million in grants for the community towards that end. And I think that that's all important, instead of having it all fall to the taxpayers to try to get grant money to try to supplement some of that. And then also, really, one of the biggest issues I think that we've been dealing with is how do we keep the water clean? If we cannot have a clean environment, then we will not be able to sustain the quality of life that we have on the Cape. Mm-hmm. And addressing the issue of wastewater is real. It is a necessity, and it's something that we have to take on now. Mm-hmm. So to that end, we have a comprehensive wastewater management plan. It's a 40-year plan over 8 phases. At this year's town meeting, we'll be asking the voters to address phase 2. So we'll be done with phase 1 and phase 2. It is a large request, over $24 million. So that will be coming online. And I think, similar to the experience with the school, we are going to see kind of a high point as we ramp up to address the issue of sewer and wastewater. But then hopefully we'll be able to start to see that tail off a little bit, and then we'll have other high points in that process. So we are managing it. A couple things that I just wanted to have as a resource for folks, that people are familiar with the annual town meeting warrant. that we have. We have included in there a little bit more of a comprehensive overview of our capital plan. And the capital plan shows to how do we manage into the future. And in FY19, there's a total of $38 million worth of spending that we need to do, capital. That's not all at once. That will be done over debt service. But then in 20 and 21, those numbers start to go down, 8 million, 4 million, and then 22, 12 million. And that $12 million, 6 of it is federal money. So, you know, we are in a period where in 19 we're exceptionally high. We understand that because of the sewer project, but that sewer is going to take probably 2 to 3 years to construct, and there won't be big requests until later. So I think the way the plan has been designed is to kind of do every 5-year increments. So we're in one of those high increments, and then we'll be heading into the low increments. But I think the revenues for this year have been pretty good. We continue to kind of experience the benefits of a strong economy. And I think with partners in terms of keeping our labor costs low, negotiating contracts that are affordable is important. I do serve on the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group on health insurance related issues, and I know some people like to attend those as well. Health insurance is a big deal. And we are looking at innovative ways to address health insurance, which is really a significant budget buster.
Yes, it is.
So this year we were successful due to some good claim history. So we had a 6% increase. When we originally started it, it was 15% was originally contemplated. So it was a good year, and all those factors have helped to create a strong financial year for us this year.
And you're still able to excuse me, put money in the budget for the stabilization fund?
Yes.
That's a very good way to go. It's good to hear. Okay. Why don't we go to the Board of Selectmen, and if you would take over and tell us what you did after Chris presented his budget to you.
Sure. The biggest change really was the addition of a position. Other than that, there was not a lot of changes. Chris had suggested a new IT position. Town of Harwich is, we have one IT position to cover the entire town. The rest is contracted out. The person that we have is stretched pretty thin, so Chris, through the Board of Selectmen, I think one of our original goals was an IT position or IT help, and we had looked for a comprehensive plan on that. The board still had questions at budget time and did not approve that. We did put $40,000 of that position money into a line item in the budget so that Chris could get help when he needs help. You know, the biggest message I think from the Board of Selectmen this year is we're looking at going to town meeting spending roughly $100 million. Now, our budget's $65 million, which includes the school and the water enterprise fund. We're spending roughly $3 million in CPC funds. We have a $30 million capital request at town meeting looking for the wastewater at roughly $24 million, the fire department at $6 million, and then there's some smaller items in there. And then we're spending roughly $2 million in free cash left over from last year's budget. All that adds up to about $100 million, and I think the Board of Selectmen this year, when presented this, had a lot of questions about its sustainability. Monomoy Regional Schools budget's $25 million, and their increase was a little over 4%, if my calculation is correct. Town budget was 7.2% increase this year. Chris cited the larger factor in that was debt service from items that were voted from town meeting last year, which is an important note because we're going to vote a lot more capital requests this year, which is going to drive the budget up for next year.
Right.
The capital plan that was provided, the financial plan, sorry, the 18 to 22 financial plan that was provided to the board from Chris, we're $2 million over the second year. And the first year showed a deficit. And the board is extremely concerned with the rising cost of the school budget, Monomoy school budget, and the town budget, and how sustainable that is to the public. In the end, 50% of this town is over 60, and a lot of people are on fixed incomes. And I think it's important in our budget message we asked for a 2% increase. board members cited that they didn't think that that was possible to hit the 2%, but it certainly was a goal. And looking at next year, this year the budgets did squeak through, and I think they were not majority votes. And I think next year, if we have the increases that we have this year, I'm not sure that the budgets are going to get the support. So the board certainly appreciates Chris has done hard work. We do end up with a fair amount of free cash. His projection for free cash next year is a lower number, I think a more appropriate number for what the budget is. And I appreciate the debt service going down in later years, as he said, which certainly will help the budget. But I do not believe that this town can sustain the growth that we're experiencing right now, and people can continue to have the increased tax base. I think on the school side, and we said this when the school committee was before us, having a strong school system makes sense, and people move to a community for a strong school system. Having a tax rate that's high, extremely high, and increases is not going to keep people in this town. So whatever we think we're going to gain based on what the board is hearing, families are leaving because they can't afford to live here. So the message really from the board is next year, let's really look at the budget increases. Monomoy will be into this will be the 7th year, if I'm doing my math correct. We had looked at a 5-year plan to stabilize the budget, and we do need to stabilize that budget, as well as the town side. And debt service next year seems like it's going to be extremely high again, which is going to be a big challenge for Chris in the budget if we're having that kind of increase based on only $7 million being added to the budget last year.
Certainly a different message. And that's why we're all here today, because I think the people in town need to understand that it's Chris's job to tell us what our needs are, what he feels is important to keep the town running in a responsible manner and to give us the services that we've gotten used to. It's your job to look at it from a different angle. And now I'd like to go to Jack Brown, who is chair of the Finance Committee. And you always get the hard part of the deal because you have to be the bad guys. So if you could explain how your votes are going this year, what challenges you have come up with, and how you've dealt with them.
Well, I think the biggest challenge has been how do you squeeze $24 million into our total budget? And that's a giant number that we all are facing with one way or another. And there's no hiding it. It's a big number. It's going to have to get dealt with through the taxpayers primarily. Hopefully we can maybe find a grant here and there, like the federal money Michael mentioned. And it's going to stay with us for a while. We have to be clear, I think, in the next coming years, that not everything we've been able to afford in the last 5 or 6 years is going to be able to be afforded in the next 5 years. And that's going to be tough because I think as a town, have been very responsible in putting the money into our infrastructure and everything from trucks and sidewalks and ideas for Saugatucket Harbor and so on. When we get through that burst of building and bonding, we're going to have to really double down on how we pay for all that. Obviously, if we can increase our revenue in ways other than asking the taxpayer for more, that would be nice. And some good creative ideas there would be helpful. At the same time, we're going to have to take a look at staff in terms of how many positions can we afford to add. As Michael says, we're not talking layoffs. But the reality is we're going to have to talk staff and figure out what we're going to do on certain areas. We can't afford them all. And I think finally we have to figure out what we're going to do in the long run with some of our assets like the middle school and Bank Street Station and so on, to try to earn some revenue in ways that we've been struggling to do, and I think that's an important point. We clearly need a strategy on, actually a policy on overtime in the town. I believe the budget next year calls for something like $2 million in overtime, and that's a very large number. People are working hard within that, and that's great, but the reality is just a big number. We can't afford that level of overtime. We've got to address that. I think we need a strategy on staffing. We have kind of been adding one, two pretty consistently, and I think we have to start thinking about what can we do so we don't have to add staff and yet get the work done. Okay. Last night, the Selectmen's meeting, Robin Kelly was talking about the Pet Cemetery crematorium, and she mentioned that some of the DPW folks are interested in providing some support for that in terms of getting the training and so on. So, you know, if you can get existing staff to do some creative new ideas, that's a great way to go. We need more of that, more of that creative thinking. I am a big fan of the schools, and I think that the reality is that we've been kind of maybe putting off how to deal with the problem of the schools, a big budget, and you know, we need a little bit more from the schools to help us with the budget problems. We've got to deal with that. They're doing great work. Some of the numbers that were shared recently around retention are fantastic. And I think we've got a lot to be proud of as a community for supporting that. And same with the regional technical high school. But they're a big cost at a time when everything else is going crazy through the roof. So we need some cooperation back and forth.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as usual, we come right down to the schools, because the schools are the ones that, as a department, you are the bigger departments in the town. You also service a community that doesn't have a voice. Some of them do. Some of them are 18 now, and they're more excited about voting than ever. But I think we do a very good job of advocating for the schools and taking care of them. Scott, if you would be willing to lead off and tell us where you are in your budget and how you manage to fit it into what the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator have come up with.
Sure. Just to start with, the Monomoy budget is a level staff budget. This, I think, is our 4th year of having a level staff budget, and I think what that has allowed us to do is keep a lot of the programs that we have been putting in place following our strategic plan. And yes, we're seeing, I think, some great outcomes from an academic standpoint that I've shared with both town select boards when I made presentations. As the school district was coming together, you know, one of the challenges we had was just what were our MCAS testing, and I had shared with the boards that our 3rd through 8th graders on the MCAS tests, on average, were performing below the state average on those tests. What we now see with this latest round of MCAS testing is our kids, 3rd through 8th grade and 10th grade, are performing, you know, well above the state average. You know, so we're seeing that academic turnaround with the system. You know, when we started, if you were at Harwich High School, there were some great things happening at Harwich High School. There was, you know, the arts program was just fantastic, and what Rose Richards and Deb Donovan did for plays there, it was fantastic, and it's nice to see, you know, this vibrant new auditorium that we've got at the high school. So we're seeing all of that continue. But at Harwich High School, you could take 4 AP classes. You know, there are kids that are taking any AP class that you want. You know, so we have kids that are now, you know, there's, I think, 16 plus AP classes that students are taking and it's paying off because now we're seeing our graduates heading off to colleges that they hadn't really gotten into before. So, so we're seeing, sort of the sky's the limit for what a student coming out of Monomoy Regional can aspire to, and it's been great to see on that front. I think in terms of just as a parent, I know one of the things that I remember fondly is the first Friday of the school year. I remember traveling with the football team over to Nantucket to play our first football game, and at the time I think we had a handful of kids as our bench, and here we are a few years later, and we have enough kids to have a JV team. We have a girls lacrosse team that's in its second year that's already big enough to have a JV girls lacrosse, in addition to the varsity lacrosse team. So it's great to see just the arts flourishing, the athletics flourishing, and to really see the gains that the school district is having on the academic front, and all of that happening within a level staff budget for the past few years. And as Mike, Jack, and Chris have alluded to, I think we do have budgetary challenges that we can see out there when it comes to how does a school budget fit within the town budget. One of the things that happens with a regional school district is each town has a minimum required contribution that has to get faced, and when it comes to our assessment is kind of blended over 3 years of enrollment. So there's a little dampening that happens with that, but with the minimum required contribution, it looks at, okay, what's the number of kids that you have in the current cohort, and it's based on how many kids from Chatham are in the system, and how many kids from Harwich are in the system, and we're seeing now a shift from Chatham towards Harwich, and while it's relatively small, those relatively small things start to add up into big dollars. And I know this was something Chris and I faced where we were fretting what would health insurance increases look like for both the town side and the school side. And when we thought, oh, the health insurance was going to be high, and it came in significantly lower, still much higher than any other budget increase in our budgets. We're like, whew, there's some breathing room, only to have, 2 days later, the governor releases his numbers, and we see the minimum required contribution is shifted from Chatham towards Harwich, and that slight shift ended up being a $450,000 shift towards Harwich in our budget. So before any other thing got factored into the Monomoy budget, our budget for Harwich was already up by almost 1.5% just with that minimum required contribution shift. And I have been sharing very publicly that that we don't see the enrollment ticking up in Chatham. Chatham seems to be able to sustain 2 sections of kindergarten, and Harwich is able to sustain 6 sections of kindergarten nicely. So we see the Harwich numbers and Chatham numbers sort of stabilizing, but with proportionally more kids in the system from Harwich, and that will, I think, that same minimum required contribution shift, I think we may start to see that happen over the next couple years, which presents a budget challenge when you have one town suddenly having to pay proportionally more for the school district because they have proportionally more students from their town in the system. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we provide those services for families and keep the strategic initiatives that we have going moving forward. There's within this budget, there's some positive things that are happening at the high school. We'll see within the FY19 budget a shift in our tech ed programs from more of a traditional wood shop to more of a robotics high-tech thing at the middle school. We have a desperate need for additional counseling, clinical services at the middle school, so we're diverting staff within the level staff budget to provide more clinical support at the middle school and at the elementary school. We have a new reading curriculum that will be rolling out to complement the new math curriculum that we put in place 2 years ago that will hopefully allow us to see even greater gains on the academic fronts for the kids. So, so there's a lot of positive things that are happening there. And I kind of acknowledge that there are fiscal challenges that we all face when it comes to budgets.
Briefly, what about school choice? Are we making any headway bringing more students in?
Well, I guess the way I look at it, it's I've never looked at school choice as trying to bring more students in as trying to keep our Harwich and Chatham families with us and have them see Monomoy as the better system to be with. And we're slowly seeing more of that. We're seeing, we've seen fewer students leave, particularly on the charter school front. We've seen in this past year fewer students heading out for charter school from the middle school. And again, I think on the high school front, we still do lose some students to Nauset, and again, I think some of the challenges that I've talked with Chris about is I think a disproportionate number of those students are leaving not for academic reasons but for athletic reasons, and to seek out bigger teams or sports that we don't have yet. So there's an interesting dynamic that goes on with that, but I do see us making good headway when it comes to school choice and having families really see that that academically they're you can get and have your child do whatever they want, given the academic program that we've got in place at the high school right now, and we're doing what we can to keep adding on those other extracurricular and athletic options so that so that families can find that within Monomoy too.
Okay, thank you. Bob, if I could ask you the same questions from the technical schools point.
Yeah, if you could bear with me for a second, since we have the voters, I'd like to say thank you to the voters for what happened on October 24th. I think it was I'm getting goosebumps as I say that, because it was probably the highlight of my career, and for all the students and staff, past and present, that after 45 years we're going to have a new vocational technical high school in the next several years is all due to the voters. And when you talk about the intergenerational component to this, and that the belief that older residents don't support the schools is not correct. 75% of the people in the district, from Provincetown to Mashpee and Harwich in particular, not only supported the building in Harwich, but also the debt exclusion.
The funding figure as well.
That does not impact the going forward the operating budget, which I was very pleased. I want to thank Mike and the Board of Selectmen, who've always been very supportive of our school, Jack on the finance side, and also Chris, who serves on our building committee, who is a leader with the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group in trying to drive down the cost of health insurance, which has been noted has been a budget buster everywhere we go. But the voters, thank you so much. And so maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the building first, and then I'll go into the budget. With regard to the building, we just borrowed $7 million in temporary borrowing at the school, and that will probably take us through November, where we plan to borrow around $75 million, which will be the bulk of the borrowing for the new school. There will be a need for a small borrowing towards the end of or midpoint of the project because of you don't want to overborrow. We're going into construction documents now, creating construction documents. We've finished design development, and we think the rest of the year will be taken up with designing, making the construction documents, then making the bid documents, and then the bidding process, with a hopeful of awarding a contract at the turn of the year and breaking ground in early winter. So that's kind of a quick timetable. With regard to the debt, one thing we had a great meeting, I think, in November, right after the vote. All 12 towns were represented in our conference room, and it was just an extraordinary meeting where we presented, our financial people presented Hilltop Securities 3 options to the towns of borrowing for 30 years, which that's what I was presenting when I was going around for the vote. always trying to present a worst-case scenario, 30 years, and at that time, 5%. But then when we presented to the towns, we gave a 30, a 25, and a 20, with rates in the threes. About 3.75% is what we're estimating. So the consensus at that meeting, although not a final decision, was 25 years. There were towns who were advocating for 20, let's get it done, and even pushing up the timetable. We did present that as an option. There were towns who were saying, no, we cannot do that. And we had always said the borrowing costs would not hit until FY '20. So I'm pleased to say that we're going to continue with that, there will be some interest costs from this temporary borrowing we did in February, which we will be covering in our operating budget. And then in FY '20, about an estimated $630,000 for the interest on that temporary borrowing, and that gets folded into the 75. So just for the voters, we're not borrowing 82, we're borrowing 75. The 7 will be folded in a 25, probably a 25-year borrowing, but that's still to be determined. We will be having another meeting with the towns to finalize what borrowing structure we use, because ultimately it's the impact on the towns. We got a lot of town meetings coming up in the spring here where there will be debt exclusions on all those, so they need to see the results of that too. So that's an update on the building, and you can always check MSBA at CCT on our website, www.capetech.us, to see the comings and goings of our building project. With regard to our FY19 budget, talk about challenges. The two biggest challenges are enrollment and per pupil expenditure. So over the last several years, we've been cognizant of that. We've had budget increases in 2013 of 2.79. The only time it got higher than that was in FY16, where we asked for 4.49. If you recall, the voters, we asked for $250,000 for the feasibility study at that point in time, which helped to fund the feasibility process that we went through leading up to the vote. Thank you so much again. In 17, we had a negative increase, and in the last 2 years, we've been under 2%. We're presenting a 1.44% increase this year, recognizing that we're down 33 students in the district. Just from FY 18 to 19, there's a variety of reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's a total budget of $14,944,000. But with regard to Harwich, the increase in the assessments around $93,000, which is really a 6.3% increase. And the reason for that is the money follows the students. And Harwich remained level at 77 students. And I also want to take the moment to thank Scott. He continues to be supportive of his 8th grade students and 7th grade students to be aware of the offerings at Cape Cod Tech, which that is not true throughout the district. Other than Nauset, it's really Monomoy and Nauset who continue to be great partners for Cape Cod Regional Technical High School. There's some work to do on the others, so maybe that's the only thing I'll say about enrollment. And we're working on it. If you look at a 23 student drop in Yarmouth in 1 year, there's things to work on there. So we will be doing so. But per pupil expenditure is real. We are, most Cape schools are towards the top of per pupil expenditure for a variety of reasons. In some cases, we are smaller schools. Smaller schools don't benefit from an economies of scale. But then when this drop that we experienced this year, we're kind of digging in sand. That I think we are, with our budget increases, trying to be as low as we possibly can and yet still preserve the things we want to accomplish in our strategic plan and have the success we've had over the years. But its per pupil is very high, but digging in sand, because when you're making these tough financial decisions, yet the number of students goes down. So if we can address the enrollment issue and continue to try to hold the line whenever possible. This year it was a lot easier. This was almost at 2% until the news on healthcare came in. So that really helped. We'll continue to work away on enrollment. I do want to talk a little bit about awards for our students, if I could. We had a great year this year. Our strategic plan was to increase the amount of students going to Skills USA districts. So in our 17 programs, they go to New Bedford for the day, and they're tested in their technical areas. We came away with 16 medals of gold, silver, and bronze. That was 91 students that went to that. We have almost 90 students going up to Marlborough to compete as well in a variety of competitions, leadership competitions and technical area competitions. And we're hoping to get a couple of students that qualify for nationals, which is, I believe, in Indianapolis, which we're really excited about, hopefully to have some great news. And then our FFA students that are in our horticulture program had we had about 16 medals at the FFA banquet, which I was happy to attend, and very excited about their prospects of, we have, I think, 4 or 5 students going on to the nationals in our FFA. So our most recent graduate follow-up study showed students, about 50% of our students going right from the graduating class of 2016 into the workforce, into the areas we've trained them in. About 36% of our students went on to further education, which takes many forms. And then a very small percentage, about 8% of our students went into the workforce, but not in what we trained in, not what we're looking for, but a small percentage. And then only 3 students were not in the workforce in any way. And we did have 4 students in the graduating class go on to the armed services, which is pretty typical for our school. So that's kind of in the nutshell the budget for FY19, and looking forward to the future. And I will say there's going to be some inconvenience on our site in the next several years. They're going to be splitting the driveway pretty soon, and one's going to be our side, one's going to be the construction side. Parking's going to be at a ultimate premium, which we don't have a full plan yet. We're working on it. Maybe turning some islands into parking. So there will be some inconveniences. The quilt show will go away for those of you looking for the quilt show, and the home and garden show is going to go away because there will not be any parking, but we want them back when the new facility's up and line. So thank you, Pam.
Well, good, thank you. It's nice to hear good news about both of the schools and the fact that you are being so successful and drawing new students in and coming up with very good results. Carol, as our financial director in the town, you probably have the hardest job trying to keep everybody happy and within the nuts and bolts of what you're supposed to do. We have tried to keep our bond rating at a high rate and even look toward a AAA. Are we there yet?
Well, on another positive note, we had a bond rating call in December. The town was going out to sell some short-term bonds for some capital projects that Saquatucket and Cranberry Valley, projects that were approved last year and in prior years as well. And so we had a bond rating. They found very positive trends here in the town of Harwich pertaining to, a strong economy, as well as reserves that are, the town is committed to funding reserves. So the town has a rating of a AA+, and was able to retain that rating.
Mm-hmm.
There are other communities that are surrounding you that may be a AAA rated, and I think that the town's future commitment to fund reserves will bring them a long way in achieving that result in the future. But for now, we were able to sustain that AA+ rate, which is excellent.
Okay. Interest rates are obviously going up. They're going up for all of us. Have you seen a difference in interest rates for some of the projects that the town has on its books?
Well, I was just in a meeting Friday afternoon with the Department of Environmental Protection for the wastewater project, and some positive information there as well. If the town will be utilizing the state revolving loan fund to fund that project, and the percentage interest costs are between 0 and 2% for the town, which saves a tremendous amount of money.
Right.
With regard to the bond market in itself, I have been following the trends of interest rates and borrowing costs, and so the town will be considering converting some of their short-term debt right now to long-term debt, and that would happen probably in May or June area. And it all depends on what the bond market is doing, because right now, the short-term interest rate that the town was able to receive was under 2%, which allows for flexibility if the short-term bond market remains at the same percentage that it is now, and the fact that the town has positive results, financial results, that puts them in a position of flexibility to continue to either sell short-term bonds or to convert them to long-term, depending on the market.
Our assessments, where are we in this cycle? I know we do it every 3 years. We send it out to be done. There's a building boom all over the Cape. I mean, everywhere you look, there's construction going on. If you need a handyman, forget it. You just can't find one because they're so busy. So has that had much of an impact on Harwich specifically?
Well, certainly the tax rate that was just set in the fall, we did see some pretty significant increases in valuations of residential properties. And we anticipate that that will continue, which is a positive result for the town of Harwich.
It is, yes. It is. It also means more taxes for certain neighborhoods, but that's life. Terry, we haven't heard from you. You are the chairman of the Monomoy Regional School Committee. Do you have anything you'd like to point out from your budget perspective?
Thanks. Thank you, Pam. Correction first, I am not the chairman of the Monomoy Regional School Committee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Our chair is Nancy Scott from Chatham. We've been alternating every other year. And our vice chair is Donna Richardson, who was unable to make it, so Terry got the third vote.
Okay.
And I'm kind of gathering my thoughts here, and want to thank Pam and Chris and Tina for creating the forum. I've served on the school committee the other night we were doing taxes, my treasurer, my wife. And I got to thinking as I'm gleaning through some stuff to throw away that my 7 or 8 years of serving, and I've volunteered to continue on for another 3-year term, it's been a familiar, and there really is no quick solution to it because it's a Commonwealth statewide structural fiscal problem. And I commend Michael to say yes to be a chair and to sit with his fellow selectmen, because it's a huge challenge. But, you know, a couple of trite but yet true, I think, that sitting here and the boards that we've created, pressure and stress is a privilege. It's fortunate that we're all here. I have a different look on this, that in fact in the 7 years I've heard that the sky is falling and the structural deficit that we're living with will not be sustainable next year and the year after and the year after, but here we are. It kind of reminds me of Sisyphus pushing that stone up the mountain. And it seems for 6 months and then it's 7 months that we're dealing with budgets, and it's a tiring experience because you really come into this task with hopefully a great deal of optimism that we can turn this town into a quality place to live and to learn. So that's kind of my first thoughts. And I said statewide. Monday of last week, the Globe had an excellent article with a lot of bad news. And as we know, bad news has wings. Amongst ourselves and amongst our fellow citizens who are looking towards us to navigate ourselves out of what we consider to be problems. So that's one of our tasks. I think we're very lucky to have Bob and Scott and Chris. In my observation over the years since we've launched all of these programs, school construction to where we find ourselves now, we have tremendous cooperation. And in my former career, that not always was the case. So that's a great asset. The other thought that strikes me, Michael, you mentioned the fear of raising these taxes with 60% of the retirees on fixed incomes is the risk you take on thin ice that people begin to flee. Myself, I have another look on that. Families don't flee excellent schools. the schools in our community, and that's what, as Pam, you said, that's my role and the role of the 7 members with me. We look at on the perspective of try to create quality where there's goodness. And many times schools are not a revenue center, and yet they are. They're profit makers. You take a look at what Scott alluded to 20, 30 minutes ago about the last 5 years and the quality that we've been able to inject through the faculty and the parents, and that's going to continue. That is a bonus. The other night I was looking, and I think Michael mentioned that 5 years or 4 years we had a stabilization plan or a launch based on the new footprint over at the present Monomoy Regional High School. And if you bear with me, how many were there when we opened the doors for that ribbon cutting?
Oh, that was a hot
Okay.
day, I remember that.
Well, I was gleaning some stuff that I had said. I must have been chair at that time. And bear with me, I think it really speaks to today. And most of us weren't there, so you can listen carefully. I greeted people, thanked the FinCom committee, the Board of Selectmen, who supported over a very long budget winter. Now, this is 4 or 5 years ago. I mentioned that 214 years is a year of cutting ribbons. When one cuts a ribbon, it opens up a new and exciting possibility, new schools, new goals for mothers and dads. One goal I'm sure we all share is to create a school of high flyers, an updated version of a Greek myth. I don't know where I got this. Monomoy students, kindergarten through grade 12, are standing on a high precipice. Teachers, coaches, mothers, dads, grandparents, that's me, urging them to soar and fly and take wing. Our kids soar, but our kids say, I can't. Maybe school committee members and committee members, that we can't really afford this. I'm not ready to fly. I'm too nervous. I'm too frightened. I'm not prepared to fly. I'm not ready to play sports. I'm not ready and willing to play on a school play or take a challenge on an AP course. Teachers, coaches, mums, dads together, gently pushing them off their ledge. They all flew. I knew high school and middle school and elementary school are really flight schools. Our teachers, coaches, administrators are flight instructors, teaching our kids how to take off, how to take wing, to fly academically, athletically, to take the performing arts and music runways. Our kids, K through 12, if they're not ready to fly, we teach them how to run. If they cannot run, we teach them how to walk. If they cannot walk, we give them wheels. We prepare them for life flight. Back in that day, 5 years ago, Dave Letterman had the top 10 of what he saw happening comically in the country. I mentioned it saying that we have taken wing here in 2015. Scott mentioned some highlights, and really for us to say fiscally where are we coming, it's like a report card. That's what Bob just did, summarizing the past year and a half. Be patient. I think we've made some excellent tasks across the street and right over into Chatham with the Monomoy School and the elementary schools. I'll look backward. Student growth, spring 2011, MCAS, Harwich. All grades, English language arts, 47th percentile. All grades in math in 2011, 46th percentile. 217 a year ago in the spring. All grades, ELA, 58th percentile. All grades math, 58th percentile. A ways to go though. Graduation rate, 2015, 80.8. 216, 89.5. Last year, 91.5. Creation of a strategic plan 3 years ago with staff and community driven. One of the 4 main objectives of that strategic plan, I invite the selectmen and my own school committee to look at this in a very serious way as the beginning of building a block of cooperation. The 4th goal, create an inspiring, positive culture that promotes and celebrates achievement. That's what we should all be about as a town.
Thank you, Terry.
I have one invitation, really, to the selectmen and for the community. And I don't personally have any solutions to a structural deficit that each year becomes furthermore worrisome. But for something I think that really is needed, rather than have 2 or 3 meetings, Mike, where we come before you and review, and 1 or 2 meetings with the Finance Committee with stress and anxiety, and everyone unsatisfied, leaving with some sense of neither of us trusted each other as much as we should, I would suggest this, and I mentioned it to Scott on the phone the other night, so I don't have the votes to even move this on, but I'll push for it. In a quieter time this summer, and forthcoming summers, I would invite a fiscal Harwich summit to be hosted over at the high school, where a select group of the chair and 1 or 2 selectmen, the chair of the finance committee, our treasurer and our finance manager, the 1 or 2 or 3 of our school committee finance members on the school committee would meet for a portion of a day with lunch and begin to review what this past year has done as far as building our budget. I know that you have 1 or 2, Mike, new select people coming on board. We do also. And 2 goals. One would very easily be to raise our knowledge base and our understanding of how we get to where we are now. And most importantly, personally contact with all of us, the 8 or the 9 of us, to build that trust that we really do need to cause us to continue to have stress and anxiety really be a privilege, so that we who represent the community and we represent the kids, we come out with maybe not full agreement, but a real sense that I do trust her. I do trust that he's attempting to make this the best school at the best price. So that's kind of the message that I give personally to myself, and I'll try to sell the superintendent on that, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you. I have to say, I think this town has gone a very long way towards accomplishing that. When I was on the school committee quite a while ago, and then on the finance committee after that, it was always a fight. You know, you just felt you were going to a meeting and you felt like, oh boy, here we go again. I don't see that happening as much. I mean, just listening to the conversation around this table. Chris, I think you've done a marvelous job with the help of your staff and the chairs of the various committees of getting people to talk together, work toward a common goal for the good of this town. I think our finances, from what I'm hearing, are in pretty darn good shape. It's a good message. Yes, there's always work to be done, and I think being cautious is a very important part of that. But I just applaud every one of you here for the jobs that you've done and the hard work that goes into this. I don't think the general public has any idea how many meetings it takes to come to a budget agreement. And it's an awful lot. So I thank you for your help, your cooperation. I look forward to town meeting. I think it's going to be, as usual, a good year. It's nice that there'll be no 2.5 overrides. That's a very positive message. So my message to the town is think about what you've heard here today. Bring these thoughts to town meeting with good questions as the articles come up, and come on out and support us. So, is there anything anybody would like to add before we wrap up? Tina has a few messages, but do any of you have
Any last comments?
any last comments?
If I may.
Yes.
Terry, just a quick response. I trust you. And it really wasn't, there was really not a lot of stress involved in this for me this year. My message is simple, and certainly you're speaking on the school side, and as a longtime taxpayer in the town of Harwich, which I respect. You mentioned turn this town into a quality place to live and learn. We already are. We are a quality place to live, and it's a great learning. I applaud both superintendents for what they've done with the schools. I'm a strong supporter of the schools. Every time I speak, I say that. Our message is simple. Our message is for the entire town. And we're privy to Council on Aging's request for 2 or 3 additional staff potentially next year. The increased abatements from the seniors that are looking for help. The budget matters. And the sustainability part of this, for me, is not the sky is falling, I can live here. There are people that contact the board, and there are people that come to the town for help, and those are the people that we are looking at, and we're looking at the town as a whole. And you know, the school this year is using, I think, 700,000 out of your E&D? Is that what the number is, 700,000? Can you use 700,000 next year? These are some of the questions that I have, and not to be answered now, but if we're using that money now, and we're not going into Prop 2.5, as Pam said, but we have had the benefit of Chris, the way Chris does his budget, of $3 million worth of free cash, $4 million worth of free cash one year, $1.9 million in free cash. So we are balancing our budget in another way. And my message is, we have to really pay attention. And not saying that you're not, because again, this wasn't stressful for me. You guys came in with a budget. We're saying that as a town and a school, we really have to pay attention to those in the community that can't. And the fleeing may be a little exaggeration, but based on your numbers, if we lose 4 kids a year, that hurts the budget quite a bit.
It does.
And we don't want to lose 4 kids a year, especially from people that live in the community. Not the people that are coming to the community, but the people that are already here. So that's it.
I just want to, you know, you gave me a nice compliment about bringing people together. But, you know, I think one of the things that I think I brought, but, you know, a partnership only works when you have a willing partner.
Right.
And I think that since, you know, I've been here, I mean, Scott and I, we try to get together at least once a month. We do bring the finance teams, to Terry's point, we bring the finance teams from Monomoy, from Harwich, and from Chatham together to just talk and brainstorm. And I think that you establish those levels of trust. I think I have both these guys in my speed dial, so if I need to, you know, have a question and answer. But I think Terry's point is a good one. You know, the more we learn how to communicate, we're all interested in the same thing. You know, that's what I found. We're all interested in the same thing. And just on a, you know, to end on a really positive note is, you know, I know people said probably at the beginning I'm too much of an optimistic person. Well, you know what, we brought in Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and we brought in a new auditor. And, you know, we passed with flying colors on both cases. And, you know, to me, they found problems. You don't bring people in and they don't find any problems, but they found some, but they were minimal. And I think the message that Carol sent was a positive one, that we are fundamentally strong and getting stronger. And I think that we need to continue that and continue to build those partnerships and continue to build that level of trust so we can continue to go into the future. And I would just say, you know, I've been in this business now, I think this is my 11th or 12th budget in a row without an override. And I want to continue, you know, that theory and continue that process. And hopefully, God willing, we'll continue to do that.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Chris.
Yes, and I want to thank everyone here. And I just want to speak to the audience for just a moment, because one of the things that I'm hearing is how well everyone here works together. And I think there's a lot of confusion kind of out in the community over what free cash means, what debt exclusion means, all these terms. And so what I'm going to invite the voter or the listeners and viewers today is, if you've got questions regarding the financial state of Harwich, send us an email. I think our email address is harwichvoterinfo, is that correct, @gmail.com? If you've got questions, please email those to the Voter Information Committee. And I think what we could do is compile a list of frequently asked questions, because as I'm out in the community, and our Channel 18 viewers are very well educated about finances, but there are a lot of people out there with a lot of questions, and they don't understand what it means, the free cash, what does that mean, you know? So I think if we could gather that information for you, the viewer, it would help a lot of these dialogues, because this sounds wonderful. And I think there's a perception that this isn't working so well. And this was part of the reason we put this together every year, so you can see how this comes together. So again, harwichvoterinfo@gmail.com. If you have questions, please do send those to us and we'll compile those. But in close, I want to thank everyone again. Terry Russell, Jack Brown, Carol Coppola, Chris Clark. Chris is like top of my mind. Chris Clark, Scott Carpenter, Bob Sanborn, Michael MacAskill, of course my colleague, Pam Groswald. Thank you all very, very much. And just want to leave the viewing audience with a few dates. because we do have a lot coming up. The last day for voter registration is April 17th, so that is the last day to register to participate in the town meeting and to vote in the town election. The town warrant, the final version, I believe, will be available April 20th. Is that correct?
Yeah, it should be, the book will be out by next week.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
all right, so the book will be out next week. So April 20th would be the final date. We, Voter Information Committee, will be hosting a pre-town meeting on April 24th. It'll be taped right here, 9 o'clock in this room, Griffin Room, and it'll be shown later. And what that is, it's a review of the major warrant articles, because that's another place where people have a lot of questions. So we'll walk through the major warrant articles with that program. And then May 1st at 6:30 here in the Griffin Room, and this is going to be open to a live audience, we will be having a moderated debate between 3 candidates for the Selectmen position that's coming up. Again, that's May 1st at 6:30 p.m. Prior to that, at 5:30, we're going to be interviewing all of those who are uncontested for some of the other positions in town. The annual town meeting, we've talked a lot about, May 7th. Please mark your calendars. And the local election, where we have 9 positions up for election. Of course, the Selectmen will have 3 candidates there. That's May 15th. So lots of very, very important dates. May 15th, the local election. May 7th, annual town meeting. Please remember to register to vote April 17th. That's coming up next week. So with those dates, mark your calendars. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you to the viewers for attending the Financial State of Harwich, our annual program. The reason we put this on is to give you more information to help educate. What are you voting on? You know, when you go to town meeting, what is that about? What are you voting on? And this is why we put this together. So again, if you've got questions that we haven't answered here today, please send us an email at harwichvoterinfo@gmail.com and let us answer them for you. So again, thank you very much. This is Tina Games, Voter Information Committee, Pam Groswald. We thank you for tuning in. Have a good day.